Joining us live from Perth, Western Australia is Mathias Cormann, the Finance Minister. Mathias, thank you so much for your time. Firstly, we'll get your response just to the Prime Minister's speech today. That's quite strong language. Don't Australians have the right to protest?
Well, of course Australians have the right to protest, and, that's been a right that people have exercised, obviously for a very long time. But it's all a matter of balance. Australians also have a right to go ahead with their lawful business and enterprise and pursue their jobs. When things are taken to an extreme, and when there is deliberate and persistent, efforts to at times violently and entirely inappropriately stop Australians to pursue their legitimate business activities and their jobs, well, then obviously, as a community, I think we've got to reassess where to more appropriately draw the line.
Now, when we come to the rights of Australians, they also have the right to safe health care in their ageing years. We've seen shocking results from the Aged Care Royal Commission's interim report yesterday. The Prime Minister, just on radio a short time ago, said there will be a financial response before the end of the year. You're the money man. Is this going to eat into the surplus?
Firstly, the findings out of the Royal Commission are deeply disturbing. Obviously, Scott Morrison as Prime Minister very early on in his Prime Ministership initiated the Royal Commission into the aged care sector. We did feel that this was a very, very important process to go through. And as I say, the findings are disturbing and we will address them. And there will be a short and a longer-term response. The Prime Minister and I, and indeed with the Treasurer, we have had an initial conversation yesterday, and yes, our intention is to provide additional funding in terms of the short-term response in the half-yearly budget update. In terms of what that means for the numbers overall, well, obviously all of that will be revealed in the half-yearly budget update in the middle of December.
Leading Age Services Australia says $500 million would be enough to get rid of waiting lists in aged care. Will it be a figure like that?
Well, look, it will be. I suspect it will be a substantial figure. It will be the figure required to, provide an appropriate immediate response, while also, of course, pursuing the longer-term reforms required to ensure that all of the issues that were identified by the Royal Commission are addressed as appropriate. There will be a strong response. We will have both an immediate and a longer-term response, and we are already working on that now with a view of having that included in our half-yearly budget update.
Should the position of aged care, or should the portfolio rather, be a cabinet portfolio? Right now it sits in the outer ministry. Should they not be at the table making cabinet decisions when it's serious enough that we had a Royal Commission with extremely damning findings?
Well, the aged care portfolio is represented around the cabinet table by Greg Hunt as the health minister, and that is I don't think that is the issue. And there has been substantial additional spending into the aged care sector from about just over $13 billion in 2012-13 to above $21 billion now, and obviously projected to grow much further. But there is a need. There's an identified further need, and across the senior levels of government, we will make sure, working with Senator Colbeck as the Minister for Aged Care, we'll make sure that we have an appropriate immediate response as well as pursuing the necessary longer-term reforms.
If we can turn to a story that's in the Sydney Morning Herald this morning, it's about the tickets you were provided through Hello World last year that it turned out you didn't pay for. They've now said 2 whistleblowers have been contacted by police and they're facing questioning over where this information came from. Is that appropriate use of police powers?
Well, look, I found out about what had happened in the media this morning in terms of the police processes. This is state police in Victoria, a Labor jurisdiction. I don't think that anyone can credibly suggest that anything there is happening at my behest. If that is the implication of what was suggested in the story today, I suspect that state police in Victoria, like police everywhere, acts independently. I should also just say there were a whole series of factual errors in that story this morning. There never was any free travel provided to me and my family. I booked travel. I supplied my credit card. When expecting obviously that the payment would be processed. When it wasn't processed, what I would have expected staff to do that became aware of that would be to either process the payment with the credit card details that were provided for that purpose, or if there was an outstanding invoice that hadn't been paid and credit card payment couldn't be processed, to chase me for it. Instead, obviously somebody inside that business made a decision to do otherwise, not to pursue me for payment, but to essentially provide that information to the media. From my personal point of view, I mean, I would have much rather, if like any other business would do in the circumstances, I had been chased for the outstanding invoice. I mean, the fact that there was an outstanding invoice just proves the point that this was never free. It was never intended to be free. I never assumed it to be free. I always assumed that I had paid. And when it was brought to my attention that there had been a stuff up in the company where that hadn't been processed the right way, I immediately corrected that.
Why didn't you just book through the website as normal then? Why did you book through the Chief Executive, Andrew Burns?
Well, obviously, I mean, I had a long-standing relationship with Andrew Burns. I had done this on a number of occasions before, principally because of privacy, quite frankly. And obviously on each occasion in the past, payment had been processed in the appropriate way. So, look, I mean, with the benefit of hindsight, that's what I should have done. I, to be honest, didn't really think much of it. I paid for it, as far as I was concerned. I paid for it on that occasion, and when it was brought to my attention that there was an outstanding invoice, I immediately ensured that it was paid in full. But I make the point again. I'm not sure that you can describe as whistleblower somebody who brings to the attention of the media that there's an outstanding invoice. If there's somebody in a business that is aware, an employee in the business that's aware of an outstanding invoice, I would have thought the appropriate course of action is to pursue payment.
Can you just explain that to me? What does privacy mean in that point? What implication for privacy would there be if you just booked through the website as normal?
Look, I mean, I've never booked travel through the website. Normally, I'd go through a travel agent. But anyway, I mean, look, at the time, I made bookings from time to time, in that way. That's a matter of public record. That has been gone through in some detail, through settled estimates earlier in the year. And obviously, my credit card details were supplied for payment, and that's that was all there was to it.
It's just you said you booked through Andrew Burns principally for privacy reasons. That just seems like a bit of a weird
as
way
opposed
to do it.
As opposed to walking into a travel agency.
Right, but that wouldn't have an issue with the website. You could do that at home.
Well, I could have. That's right. I could have. That's quite right.
Right, and so when it comes to these two whistleblowers who've been spoken to by police, do you know who has filed the complaint with police?
No, I don't. Certainly hasn't got anything to do with me. I wasn't involved in any complaints, so I mean, I really don't know. I mean,
so
I could
you
speculate,
haven't lodged
but
a
I don't
complaint
know.
yourself?
No.
Will you be following up to find out who has laid these complaints?
I don't think that this has got anything to do with me, to be honest. I mean, obviously, this now serves to bring this whole issue up again. I mean, I just remind you again. I mean, I booked travel. I supplied my credit card details to pay for it. I was shocked and surprised when that payment hadn't been processed, and as soon as I became aware of that, made sure that it was. I would have personally expected, from my point of view, that if anyone in the company, any employee in the company that I booked the travel with had been aware that the invoice was still outstanding, that they would have either used the credit card details to process the payment, which had been supplied for that purpose, or they would have pursued me for a payment of an outstanding invoice. That's what I would have expected to happen in the circumstance. But I don't know what the circumstances are in which that information went to the media. I quite frankly, I'd forgotten about the story.
And when it's being investigated by Victoria Police, their fraud and extortion squad, are you concerned that this may have been an attempt to extort you?
Me? I mean, I have not had any involvement with this whatsoever. I was unaware that this particular squad was involved in this. And I don't think that anyone can credibly suggest that the squad that you just referenced would be, in Victoria, a Labor jurisdiction, would be doing anything at the behest of a Commonwealth Minister. I mean, I suspect that you're not suggesting that.
No, I was thinking you might be a victim in that scenario. But just finally, before we have to wrap up, there is an interest rate decision next Tuesday. We are expecting, well, I guess there's mixed commentary about whether it will be left on hold or if there will be another cut. What are you predicting for next week?
Well, look, I don't speculate about monetary policy. In the end, these are matters for the Reserve Bank Governor and the Reserve Bank Board to consider. They will do as they always do, and that is to review all of the data and relevant economic information and make a judgment. Now, I would just point you to recent comments by the RBA Governor when he's pointed out that he expects economic growth to gradually strengthen, and he expects to return to trend growth within 12 months. And so that is, broadly consistent with our assessment. And of course, we'll be providing our own updated economic outlook as part of our half-yearly budget update in December.
Is an interest rate as low as the level it is now sustainable?
Well, I mean, that is a judgment for the Reserve Bank to make. And, as the Reserve Bank Governor has said now on a number of occasions, they are keeping an eye on what is happening to, official cash rate settings in jurisdictions all around the world. And obviously that is a relevant consideration for them. And I'm sure that they will continue to assess all of the relevant factors in making their judgments.